Hello everybody, is everyone alright? I am okay. I'm a bit nervous. I'm a bit nervous because today I want to talk about War, War and Flipping Peace. War and Flipping Peace by Leo Tolstoy. So I recently just finished this. It took me a month and a half to finish it, but I've finished it. And yes, Lord help me, I want to talk about it. So yes, I'm a bit nervous. Why am I nervous to talk about it? Well, because it's a big old book. It deals with the big questions. It's a historical fiction novel. Yeah, there's lots of different things about it, but I feel compelled to discuss my or share my feelings about it, because I do feel like it's kind of one of those books, isn't it? It's kind of one of those bucket listy, tick off type books. If you like to read classic fiction, which I kind of do, then yeah, it's one of those books. And for me, it's a book that I've felt ready for. So yeah, because I've read a handful of like 19th century Russian fiction now, and yeah, for the past sort of couple of years, I've sort of felt ready for War and Peace, and now I've done it, and yes, so here we are. So War and Peace. So yeah, so of course this is about the Napoleonic Wars. It was an historical fiction novel in its day, so it was published in full, I think, in 1869, I think. But it deals with the events of 1805 to around about 1812, I think. And it's about how the forces of war and politics affect the lives of everyday people. So yeah, so before I get too involved in the actual plot of it, I do want to talk about the end. And don't worry, I'm not going to give any plot spoilers, but I want to talk about the end, because the end, to me, kind of just sums up kind of what Tolstoy was wanting to do with the whole of the shebang. So the novel is made up of 4 big volumes and an epilogue. And the epilogue itself is about 100 pages, but the epilogue is made up of 2 parts. So it's basically like 2 epilogues. So the first part is kind of like a normal epilogue, what you'd expect from a fiction novel, which is like, and a few years later, this is what the characters were doing, so that's fine. But the second epilogue is something a bit different. It is this kind of non-fiction extended essay, almost, from Tolstoy. And it's kind of his feelings about history and the problem with historians kind of talking about history. And basically, part of his argument is that historians like to say that history is kind of made up of these people in power doing things which then shape the course of history. So, for instance, Napoleon starts the Napoleonic Wars, and he invades Russia with his army, and Alexander then kind of fights back and pushes him out and everything. And that's all very well, except Tolstoy basically argues that no, that's not what history is. History is the whole of civilization, everyone doing all their different individual things, which collectively makes up history, basically. And he talks about power, and he talks about kind of the nature of power and how, one person having power over a group of people, and that group of people then having an influence on people in power. He talks about that. And most interestingly to me, he talks about this dynamic between free will and a kind of determinism, and how the two kind of work with and against each other. And Tolstoy he sort of argues for both. He sort of says that both can exist at the same time. So we have free will to do what we want within a framework of given circumstances, which is kind of like that we can't help, basically. And it's this nexus between freedom and necessity, what we have to do, and what we want to do. Whether that's sort of determinism or something else, Tolstoy kind of argues that it's kind of like a mixture of both. And then relating back to history is not then the actions of the people in power. History is made up of the infinite decisions and actions of everybody, all kind of culminating in what happens. So how does this relate to War and Peace, the novel? Well, Tolstoy wants to examine history not just from the perspective of those people in power, but he wants to look at the lives of everyday people and how their passions and their fears and their hopes and their dreams all kind of culminate into what happens in the war, and how, you know, the actions of the everyday people has this kind of ripple effect to the people in power, i.e. Napoleon. So who are the characters that Tolstoy comes up with to do all this stuff? Well, there isn't any kind of like main character. You have a handful of main characters. So first of all, we have Prince Andrei, who, I mean, there isn't a hero of the novel, but I suppose he's sort of the hero, I guess. I mean, he's the kind of the handsome, brooding, you know, man who goes off to the war and kind of is the heroic, brave person. He does a lot of sort of staring off into the distance like this, and then he does a lot of kind of navel gazing. He does a lot of kind of thinking about, you know, what is the meaning of life, and what is love? Baby, don't hurt me no more, quite literally. And so he sort of experiences these kind of big life and death moments in war, and he experiences love and betrayal and all the rest of it, and sort of wanting for revenge and all of that. So we've got him. Then we have Natasha. And so at the start of the novel, I believe she's like 14 at the start of the novel. And yeah, she's not a girl, not yet a woman. And she's at this point where she's sort of discovering that she has an allure, And as she kind of moves through her late adolescence, she kind of realizes that she can allure the male. And she kind of becomes a little bit reliant on this, a little bit, and she kind of likes it a little bit too much. She likes having the allure, and this kind of results in her making a monumental misjudgment, which then has disastrous consequences. Disaster. And she's kind of a bit annoying. She's very vain. She's very spoilt. And yeah, she's kind of, I mean, she gets sort of comeuppance for her actions, but yeah, she's kind of like she's a bit of an annoying character. Then we have Pierre. Now Pierre, he has the kind of the biggest journey, as we like to say in the business. He starts off as the illegitimate son of this really, really rich guy. And he kind of, at the beginning of the novel, he hangs about with gamblers and, you know, and ne'er-do-wells. He hangs about with them. But then his father dies, and against all odds, he bequeaths his vast fortune to Pierre. And suddenly Pierre is now, from going from a kind of really opinionated, annoying, everyone kind of not really liking him at parties, suddenly he's one of the richest men in Russia, and everyone's like, hello! And so, yeah, he has this kind of big journey of kind of realizing, like, everyone loves me just because of my money? And he kind of ends up in this disastrous marriage with Helene, the nasty Helene. And yes, and then when the war eventually happens, he kind of, he sort of ends up with no shoes and a prisoner, and he sort of witnesses, you know, these horrific things to do with war and stuff. And he also has lots of kind of like, what is life moments, similar to Prince Andrei. His main thing is about happiness. What is happiness, and what am I doing in my life, and all that sort of stuff. So that's Pierre. Then there's Princess Maria. I want to say Princess Maria. She's the brother of Prince Andrei, and she has this sort of interesting journey in that she starts off as very, very, very religious and dutiful to her really nasty father. So Andrei and Maria's father is basically an asshole. He's really, really cruel, particularly to Maria. He's very sort of nasty, but he has this kind of unspoken. Yeah, he's basically really dependent, without sort of saying it. He's very, very dependent on Maria, and she kind of, there's this sort of unspoken thing that they really need each other, but he's just a real nightmare to her. And then she kind of, as the novel progresses, she kind of falls in love, and she doesn't kind of, I mean, this is 19th century, she doesn't quite get autonomy, but she kind of, yeah, there's a change that happens within her. And then we have Nikolai, who is Natasha's brother, and he's a bit annoying. His journey is about kind of more to do with his bravery, I guess. I mean, in the first war in Austerlitz, he ends up kind of being a bit like, oh, this is war. Oh, right, I'm not so keen on this. So he goes from that, and then he kind of gets braver, and as the novel goes on, he gets a little bit more kind of opinionated and things. So yeah. But yes, so essentially we have a group of characters who are in this kind of life and death war circumstance, and they're all trying to make decisions that will further their happiness. And this kind of pursuit of happiness is driven by, sometimes by a sense of duty, sometimes by a sense of kind of what they feel like they should be doing. But more often than not, that it is a pursuit of happiness that is driven by things underneath the belt. So yeah, love and lust is a massive, massive factor of the novel and what these characters do. So are these characters making decisions to pursue their happiness or survival of their own free will? Or is all the surrounding circumstances dictating what they are going to do? Is the fact that when Prince Andrei sees Natasha at a ball, does he have a decision to fall in love with her, or is it always going to happen that he's going to fall in love with her head over heels? So there are lots of things that I really loved about this novel, and lots of things I found really interesting. One thing that's very, very interesting about this is that it is a mixture of fiction and non-fiction. So we do have, I mean, it's a novel, and we're looking at these fictional characters, but every so once in a while you get these sort of extended bits of history. It sort of becomes like a history book rather than a non-fiction history book, rather than a historical fiction book, where Tolstoy kind of explains to us the actions of an army, the sort of the battle plans. And these bits, I mean, I wasn't so interested in those bits, and I always sort of thought that, particularly the battle bits, I always thought those bits were a bit of a slog. But having got to the end, those bits are they are sort of necessary in the wider thing of the book, because this is about history, and it's about his sort of critique of history, and it's kind of looking at history on his own terms, in terms of looking at it through the lens of art and through fiction. If that makes any sense at all. I really loved. Now, I don't annotate my books, and I don't sort of put tabs in like you see some people do. But this is a book where I kind of wish I did do that with this, because like a lot of Russian literature, there are a lot of kind of meaning of life type sort of passages. And yes, it's very navel-gazy, and yes, it's very kind of like, oh, indulgent, but I did kind of like those bits. I like those bits where you had like Pierre kind of thinking, oh gosh, what is the meaning of life? Or Prince Andrei going, what is the meaning of life? And I like those bits, because I just like that sort of questioning of like the big questions, like love and death and God and everything. And there's plenty of that in here. And yes, and I just, particularly the second half when Moscow is invaded, I loved the kind of the immediacy of that, and I loved like that the Rostov family has to sort of like they have to choose what is most important. They have to kind of prioritize their kind of possessions and their kind of belongings over a group of wounded soldiers. Are they going to help these wounded soldiers, or are they going to use their carriages to help cart off their pots and pans and stuff. Not pots and pans, they're vases and paintings and things. So is it worth it as a read? Yes, it is definitely worth it. I mean, it's kind of, I only sort of recently finished it, so I'm still sort of working out kind of what my views about it are. But I think that the ending really did surprise me. It shouldn't have done really, because all the way through you get these kind of bits of non-fiction. But the ending kind of essay, it did kind of, in the epilogue, it did surprise me, and I was sort of like working my way through it, kind of going, because it is dense. I mean, that end epilogue is just like, it's very, very dry and very kind of like, but it is fascinating in relation to what's happened before in these kind of life and death situations that have happened before. And yeah, I think what Tolstoy is trying to get at is that it is a mixture of the two, that we do have free will, and that, you know, we sort of try our best. We're sort of trying our best to do the right thing, and these characters, you know, they are trying their best in very sort of extreme circumstances. And yes, and we all shape history. It's not just the people in power. It's all of us. It's a collective effort on how history goes. So we better watch out. So yeah, I just want to finish with a quote from the book, which kind of talks about all this sort of stuff. So yeah, so this is so Pierre is looking up in the night sky and he sees a comet, and this is a comet that actually existed, which I thought was interesting. But yes, so he says, almost in the middle of that sky stood the huge bright comet of the year 1812, surrounded, strewn with stars on all sides, but different from them in its closeness to the earth, its white light and long raised tail. That same comet which presaged, they said, all sorts of horrors and the end of the world. But for Pierre, this bright star with its long luminous tail did not arouse any frightening feeling. On the contrary, Pierre, his eyes wet with tears, gazed joyfully at this bright star, which, having flown with inexpressible speed through the immeasurable space on its parabolic course, suddenly, like an arrow piercing the earth, seemed to have struck here its one chosen spot in the black sky, and stopped, its tail raised energetically, its white light shining and playing among the countless other shimmering stars. It seemed to Pierre that this star answered fully to what was in his softened and encouraged soul, now blossoming into new life. So do I recommend it? Absolutely. This edition, this is the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation. There's some annoying bits about this translation, particularly the French, but ultimately I really liked it. And yes, so would I recommend it? Absolutely. It is a commitment, but I think it is worth it because it's War and Flipping Peace. It talks about our humanity and our relationship to history and how we all contribute to history. So the decisions that we make, we better be careful about them. So yes, thank you for watching if you've been watching. I hope that you are well. And yes, go on, read some Tolstoy. You know you want to.